Hi everyone, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. I'm really happy you're here. Tonight, we're going to go on a calm and quiet trip to learn something amazing. So get comfy, take a deep breath, and let's enjoy this peaceful science story together. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? If you like relaxing science videos, don't forget to tap the like button. Now let's begin. Long ago, the Earth was warmer, greener, and filled with creatures that now live only in stone and memory. Among them walked the dinosaurs, and some carried shapes that seemed to defy reason. Great horns, curling frills, and tall ridges rose from their heads and backs like sculptures carved by the wind. To us, they look strange, almost unnecessary. Yet in their world, each curve and crest held meaning. The horns that pointed to nowhere were not mistakes, but whispers of a deeper story written in bone. Imagine the land as it was then. Vast plains covered in ferns, cycads and conifer trees stretching toward a sky hazy with volcanic breath. Herds of plant-eating dinosaurs moved slowly across the landscape, their heavy feet pressing into soft earth. Some wore shields of bone that spread behind their heads like petals of stone, while others grew horns long and sharp as branches. The sight was both beautiful and puzzling. Why should an animal carry such weight, such awkward decoration, if it did not need it to eat or flee? This is where the quiet mystery of evolution unfolds. The ceratopsians are the dinosaurs most remembered for their horns and frills. Triceratops, with its 3 proud spears and broad bony collar, has become almost a symbol of the dinosaur age. But many of its relatives carried horns that seemed more like ornaments than weapons. Some had little stubs that pointed backward. Others carried curving frills with openings like windows. Scientists look at these bones and wonder, were they shields against predators, or signals to each other like flags fluttering in the wind? Perhaps they were both, or perhaps something else entirely. In science, we often ask why nature chooses extravagance. The horns that seem to point nowhere might have been songs without sound, displays meant not for fighting but for attracting. Much like the peacock's feathers, heavy and shimmering yet useless for flying, a dinosaur's horns could have been a message of strength and vitality. To carry such heavy bone and still walk, still graze, still survive, this alone could whisper to others, I am healthy, I am strong, I am worth following. Evolution sometimes builds beauty simply to test endurance. Now imagine the slow growth of these creatures. A young ceratopsian hatches small, fragile and almost plain. Its head is smooth, with only hints of the future frill. As seasons pass and years roll over, the frill grows broader, the horns sharper or stranger. Each year adds weight and shape until the animal is crowned with its full display. Herds of them together must have been like living parades, their heads swaying under sunlight and shadows of horns dancing on the ground. The land itself must have felt alive with their silent music. Not all horns were sharp. Some curved back toward the head, some stretched sideways like wings, some pointed straight up into the sky. They were not built for battle, or at least not solely for it. A predator might lunge, but these horns were awkward weapons. They did not all pierce cleanly. Some would break before they struck. Yet their presence alone may have been enough to turn danger away. The shape itself, the size, the silhouette on the horizon. Sometimes fear is built not by function, but by appearance. A horn that points nowhere can still say, do not come near. Fossils reveal details beyond bone. The frills carried blood vessels, grooves where skin and keratin once stretched. Some may have been bright with colour, changing with age or season. Picture a herd of dinosaurs under a fading sun, their frills glowing faintly red or blue, like lanterns lit from within. To each other, these colours may have spoken of readiness, of maturity, of belonging. To us, it is silent stone, but in their time it was living language. A frill that looked strange in death may have been radiant in life. The land itself shaped these creatures. Wide plains and open spaces give room for display. When food is abundant, when survival does not demand constant struggle, evolution allows experiments. A horn can grow longer, a frill can grow broader, because there is energy to spare. And so, like a painter with time, nature tried shapes without fear of failure. Some worked, some did not, but all were written into bone, carried across millions of years. The odd ones, the weird ones, are not mistakes. They are sketches in the endless notebook of life. We must also imagine the sound of these animals. A frill with holes may have caught the wind, humming like a flute. A horn's curve may have amplified calls, turning low bellows into echoes that rolled across valleys. Science cannot yet hear these sounds, but the shapes suggest possibilities. Perhaps a herd moving together created music of its own, wind through horns and frills blending with calls and footsteps. The earth then was not silent. It was alive with tones we may never fully recover. Horns that seem to point nowhere may have carried voices toward the sky. In our world, we sometimes measure value only in survival. We ask, does it help to eat, to run, to fight? But evolution is not so narrow. It shapes beauty as well as strength, display as well as defense. The horns of these dinosaurs may have been conversation rather than combat, attraction rather than armor. They remind us that life does not always choose the straight path of utility. Sometimes it chooses wonder, extravagance, even weirdness. Because survival is not only about living, it is about living together and speaking without words. As the day fades in this ancient world, the herd gathers near water. The reflections in the pool are strange and lovely, horns rising like shadows of branches, frills spreading like wings. A predator watches from the edge, but it does not attack. The herd is too many, too strong, too strange to risk. The horns that point nowhere have done their work. They have built presence. They have made the herd look larger, more powerful, more untouchable. In the fading light, the shapes seem almost holy, like sculptures laid by gods of stone and time. And so, when we look at fossils now, we are looking at art as much as anatomy. These horns, these frills, they're reminders that nature creates with imagination. They are whispers of a time when being alive meant carrying monuments on your head, signals of both survival and beauty. They are not mistakes, not accidents. They are mysteries with meaning still unfolding, lessons written in silence but felt in wonder. The horns that pointed to nowhere pointed instead to life's endless creativity, his gentle insistence on being more than necessary, on being beautiful even in the face of extinction. If the first glance at these strange horns makes us curious, the deeper gaze reveals a more complex picture. The horns that pointed in odd directions were not the only mysteries. Their wide frills with scalloped edges and even holes tell a story about life that goes beyond defense. They remind us that nature writes in layers, where each shape carries more than one purpose. To understand them fully, we must drift deeper into the science of display, communication, and the hidden language of form. The ceratopsians lived in herds, moving together like tides across ancient plains. In such groups, identity matters. How does one animal recognize another? How does a mate choose among many? bright crests, unusual horns, and broad collars became signals of recognition, like names etched in bone. A triceratops may have carried 3 strong horns, while a pentaxeratops held 5, its frill spread like wings. To us they appear excessive, but in a world of countless herds and endless motion, these shapes were like lanterns guiding connection. Scientists study the lines of growth on these bones, the marks of age that build year upon year. They see how the horns grew slowly, swelling during the years of maturity. This suggests a role in attraction, much like antlers in deer today. The young were plain, the adults extravagant. When they reached full strength, the display was complete and the message was clear. A broad frill, heavy and ornate, was not a burden but a song of health. Only those strong enough to grow and carry such weight could pass it on to the next generation. The frills were not solid shields alone. Some were thin, almost delicate, filled with openings that would weaken them in a fight. Why would nature allow weakness? The answer lies in beauty. The holes and curves allowed light to pass, perhaps revealing colours in skin or keratin stretched across them. Blood vessels left grooves, hinting at patterns that may have flushed with life, glowing red or gold in the sun. These displays were not weapons, but paintings, artworks worn on the living canvas of a dinosaur's head. In ecosystems, display is as powerful as defense. A predator faced not just claws or teeth, but the decision of risk. A herd with towering frills and sharp horns seemed more dangerous than it truly was. The illusion of power is often enough to keep danger away. Just as a butterfly shows eyes on its wings to frighten birds, a ceratopsian's ornate headgear could bluff threats into retreat. The weird horns were shields of the mind, creating hesitation where survival depended on moments of choice. The variety of horn shapes also speaks of diversity. No 2 species were quite the same. Some bore spikes that curved backward, others spread fans of bone wider than their skulls. This suggests that each group developed its own identity, a way of standing apart in the crowded landscape. Evolution carved uniqueness into their very bones. For scientists today, these differences are keys to understanding family trees, tracing how one form branched into another, like rivers dividing across time. But why so many experiments? The answer may lie in sexual selection, the force that shapes beauty beyond necessity. Just as birds of paradise grow feathers that hinder flight, or elk carry antlers that sap energy, dinosaurs too were pulled by the invisible hand of attraction. The weirder the horns, the more striking the display, the more likely they were to draw attention. In this way, evolution sometimes rewards the unusual, carrying the oddest shapes forward through generations until they become hallmarks of survival. These horns also connect dinosaurs to us, for we too carry traits born of display. Our hair, our voices, our smiles, they're not required for survival in the strictest sense, yet they define us. They help us connect, attract, belong. When we look at the horns of a Centrosaurus or the frill of a Styracosaurus, we are looking at echoes of our own story, where beauty and survival weave together. The dinosaurs remind us that nature values more than function. It values presence, identity, and wonder. The science of these creatures continues to grow. Each fossil uncovered is a new piece of the puzzle, a whisper from a vanished age. CT scans reveal inner chambers of bone, showing how light and blood may have played through them. Comparisons to living animals suggest how colour and texture might have appeared. Slowly, the silence of stone becomes a faint echo of life. The horns that puzzled us become clearer with each discovery, though they remain wrapped in mystery, inviting imagination as much as evidence. At sunset in that ancient world, the herds would have glowed, frills catching the last light, horns silhouetted against purple skies. Their movements would have been slow, steady, graceful, each step carrying centuries of evolution. The young watched the old, learning shapes as language, reading signals that guided survival. What to eat, when to move, whom to trust, all of it written in the silent speech of horns and frills. Life itself was carried on their heads, not just bone but culture, memory and connection. In our time we see them only in fragments. A skull in stone, a frill half buried in earth, horns broken by the weight of ages. Yet even now their presence stirs wonder. They are lessons in how life bends toward both strength and strangeness, how weirdness is not weakness, but possibility. The horns that seemed to point nowhere pointed instead to futures unseen, to the quiet truth that life grows in many directions at once, some practical, some poetic, all beautiful in their way. As night settles on that ancient land, the herd lies down in grass thick with the ancient pollen. The frills fold into shadows, horns rest against the earth. Stars rise, the same stars we see now, and their light falls on these creatures of bone and wonder. For a moment, time collapses, and the weirdness of their shapes feels less like an oddity and more like a bridge. They lived, they thrived, they carried their beauty proudly, and now, in memory, they remind us that strangeness is a form of truth. The final chapter of these strange horns is not only about what they were, but what they mean to us now. In the silence of museums, under glass and careful light, the bones of ceratopsians rest. Children look up at them wide-eyed. Adults linger with quiet wonder, and paleontologists trace every line with careful hands. The horns that once pointed into the air, that once shone with colour and blood, are now pale and still. Yet they carry stories through time, like vessels of memory. They tell us that life is not a straight path, but a tapestry where beauty, strength, and strangeness all find place. In studying these creatures, scientists do more than collect data. They learn humility, for even with technology, with scans and measurements, some questions remain unanswered. Why a certain curve? Why a certain hole in the frill? Why horns too long to be useful? Science can offer guesses, display, defense, recognition, but the certainty may be lost forever. This unknowing becomes its own lesson. Not all mysteries must be solved to hold meaning. Sometimes it is enough to wonder, to stand in front of a fossil and feel awe at the creativity of nature. These horns also remind us of time's immensity. The dinosaurs lived millions upon millions of years ago, in cycles of rise and fall that dwarf human history. The horns we see now are not recent oddities, but echoes of a world so old it seems like myth. In their presence we are reminded of how brief our own moment is, how quickly beauty can vanish, and how much the earth remembers even when we forget. Their strangeness becomes a reminder of both our smallness and our connection to the endless unfolding of life. Imagine walking through their world once more. The ground trembles with their steps, leaves rustle under their weight. A herd moves slowly across the land, horns catching sunlight like rivers of bone. They are calm, grazing, yet each head carries a crown that speaks of survival and display. In this vision, the horns are not strange at all. They are perfectly natural as a flower's petals or a bird's song. What seems odd to us is simply part of their truth, a truth lived fully in their time. As extinction came, as fire and shadow covered the earth, the horns could not save them. No display, no strength, no beauty could stand against the vast shift that ended their age. Yet in death they left behind more than bones. They left behind a record of life's experiments, a gallery of forms that continues to inspire. In every horn that points oddly, in every frill that spreads wide, there is a message. Life is not limited to what makes sense in the moment. It creates beyond reason, beyond need, beyond simplicity. The poetic truth of these horns lies in what they reveal about survival itself. To survive is not only to eat, to run, to fight, it is to attract, to belong, to express. The horns that pointed nowhere were symbols of connection, of community, of the invisible ties that hold herds together. In this way, they were not useless at all. They were essential, not in combat, but in culture, in the quiet language of recognition. They remind us that survival is not just a body's endurance, but a heart's place in the world. When we reflect on their weirdness, we also reflect on our own. We too carry traits that seem unnecessary. We paint pictures, sing songs, build monuments. None of these feed us directly or protect us from danger. Yet they define who we are, just as horns define the ceratopsians. The strange shapes of dinosaurs are mirrors of our own strangeness, proof that life has always chosen paths of beauty alongside paths of need. In them we see ourselves, creatures who create more than survival demands. As dawn rises in that ancient world, the herd lifts its heads once more. The horns catch light, the frills glow with faint colour, and the land is filled with their presence. They walk together side by side, their strangeness no burden, but a banner of identity. They do not know that one day their bones will rest in stone, that their shapes will puzzle distant minds. They know only the present, the grass beneath their feet, the sky above, the safety of the herd. Their weirdness is not questioned, it simply is. And so we close their story gently, not with final answers, but with quiet reverence. The horns that pointed to nowhere were not empty accidents. They were lines in nature's poem, verses written in bone across a canvas of time. They remind us that life's experiments are worth treasuring even when they seem odd, even when they seem unnecessary. For in the end, it is the unnecessary that often becomes the most beautiful, the most memorable, the most enduring. The horns endure, not in flesh, but in memory, carrying forward the truth that weirdness is a form of wonder. Now, when you stand before a fossil skull and see the strange curves of bone, let your thoughts soften. Imagine the herd in sunlight, the horns swaying gently, the frills glowing with colour. The echo of their presence, not as monsters, but as living creatures, full of grace and beauty. The horns that once seemed to point nowhere will point instead toward your own sense of awe, guiding you not to answers but to questions, not to certainty, but to wonder, and in that wonder they will live again. When we think of feathers, our minds drift toward wings spread wide, lifting birds into the sky. Feathers, to us, are almost inseparable from the act of flight. Yet in the ancient world of dinosaurs, feathers appeared long before the first true bird ever left the ground. They grew on creatures that could not fly, draping their bodies in strange coats of down, quills and plumes. These feathers were not built for soaring. They were meant for other purposes: warmth, display, identity, and in their presence, we discover another gentle story about how nature works with patience and imagination. Picture a small theropod dinosaur stepping through the ferns of the Jurassic forest. Its arms are short, its body built for running rather than gliding. Yet on its skin lies a covering of delicate filaments, soft as whispers. They ripple faintly with each movement, catching sunlight as if painted with invisible colours. To our eyes, these feathers seem misplaced, almost useless. Why should a creature unable to fly carry them? But to the animal itself, they are no burden. They are part of its life, its warmth, its survival, its strange beauty. Feathers first arose not as wings, but as insulation. The earth was warm in the age of dinosaurs, yet nights grew cool and young creatures needed protection from losing heat. Simple filaments sprouted from skin, trapping air close, keeping warmth in. These proto-feathers were no more than hollow fibres, but they served a purpose as clear as fur does today. A hatchling wrapped in fuzz had a better chance at survival than one left bare. Over time, these filaments thickened, branched, and spread, becoming more intricate, more versatile, more beautiful. But warmth was only the beginning. Once feathers existed, nature found new uses for them. Some thickened into quills that stood upright along the arms or back like banners carried by soldiers of a forgotten army. These quills may have signalled health, strength, or readiness. Others grew longer and softer, spreading across tails and arms. They did not lift the body into the air, but they caught the eye. In the dim green light of forests, these plumes may have shimmered, turning bodies into living paintings. The feathers became language, silent, visual, powerful. Scientists now know that many dinosaurs wore feathers. Fossils in fine-grained stone reveal imprints delicate as smoke, shadows of plumage frozen in time. Velociraptors, long imagined as sleek and scaly, carried wings of feathers on their arms. Larger cousins, too heavy to flee, still wore coats of down. Even giants like Uranus, a predator longer than a bus, were cloaked in thick feathers. These discoveries remind us that dinosaurs were not monsters of bare scale alone. They were creatures of softness as well as strength, of warmth as well as teeth. The feathers that never flew served many roles. For some, they were warmth in cold winds. For others, they were tools of attraction, much like the tail of a peacock or the mane of a lion. To carry a bright plume, to grow a wide fan of feathers, was to say, I am healthy enough to spare energy on beauty. It was to whisper strength without striking. In this way, feathers became quiet signals of fitness, shaping survival not through battle, but through belonging. Life always finds ways to speak beyond words, and in dinosaurs, feathers were among its earliest voices. We can imagine herds or packs where these feathers mattered. Perhaps young dinosaurs bore plain coats, soft and grey, while adults grew brighter, more elaborate. Perhaps males and females looked different, their feathers shaping identity. In these ways, display became as important as defense. The feathers became stories written on the body, helping each creature find its place. And when danger came, when predators approached, a flash of feathers could distract or confuse, a sudden burst of colour startling enough to buy a moment's escape. Even without flight, feathers helped them survive. But there is poetry in their futility too. Many of these dinosaurs would never fly, no matter how fine their plumage grew. Their bodies were too heavy, their arms too short. Yet still the feathers spread, still they flourished. It was as if nature was preparing slowly, gently, for something yet to come. These feathers were practice strokes before the full painting, experiments in warmth and display, that one day would lift wings into the sky. The feathers that never flew laid the foundation for every bird that glides today, for every sparrow, every eagle, every song carried on the wind. When you look at a bird now, you're looking at echoes of dinosaurs. Each feather is a thread that ties the present to the past. The softness of a chick's down, the shimmer of a hummingbird's throat, the spread of an eagle's wing. All of these grew from that first fuzz on creatures that could not leave the ground. Their weirdness was not wasted. It was the beginning of something vast, something beautiful. They remind us that life does not leap in single strides. It drifts, it meanders, it experiments, and in its experiments it creates wonders. In the forests of long ago, the feathers must have glowed. Under moonlight they would shimmer softly, catching silver light in their fibres. Under sunlight they may have burned with hidden colours, patterns that eyes could read even if ours cannot. Each movement would stir them like grass in wind, turning the body into a living landscape of textures. For the creatures who carried them, these feathers were as natural as skin, as ordinary as breath. Yet to us they are revelations, pieces of a story that connects monsters to songbirds, terror to tenderness. And so the feathers that never flew were never useless. They were bridges between survival and beauty, between warmth and wonder. They remind us that evolution is not a straight ladder, but a web of possibilities. Some paths end, some continue, some transform into things unimaginable at their start. What seems strange in one age becomes natural in another. The feathers that clung to the backs of dinosaurs now fill the skies in wings of geese and gulls, in sparrows outside our windows, in swallows that circle under summer suns. What was once weird is now ordinary, and what was once ordinary is now miraculous. To drift deeper into the story of feathers is to realize that they were more than mere coverings. They were tapestries of life, woven with threads of evolution that stretched across millions of years. These feathers, fragile as they seem, carried resilience. Each filament, each plume, was a survival tool, an identity marker, and a step toward transformation. They may never have lifted some dinosaurs into the air, but they lifted the meaning of what it meant to be alive. The earliest feathers were simple hollow filaments, barely more than stiff hairs. In the beginning they trapped air for warmth, helping small dinosaurs survive cool nights and shaded forests. But as generations passed, these simple filaments began to branch. They split into tufts, then into veins, until they formed patterns that could catch light and create shimmer. Nature took what was once plain and made it intricate. This pattern of growth mirrors the way life itself evolves, from simplicity to complexity, from utility to beauty. One of the most fascinating truths is that colour may have already played a role in these ancient feathers. In fossilised remains, tiny structures called melanosomes, shapes within cells that hold pigment, have been found. Their forms match those in modern birds, which give rise to colours from black to blue to iridescent green. This means that even before flight, feathers carried colour, perhaps bright patterns that flashed in the sun. Imagine a small dinosaur cloaked in stripes of orange or speckled with black and white, its plumage alive with meaning. To predators, it was a signal of caution, to its own kind a sign of recognition. The role of feathers as display is one of the most poetic chapters in their story. Feathers expanded across tails, arms and backs, not for function but for spectacle. A tail plume could sway in courtship, a crown of feathers could rise in challenge, a spray of quills could signal dominance. In each case, the feathers became a language of their own. They allowed dinosaurs to speak without sound, to communicate strength, readiness, or belonging through silent gestures. The forest, alive with these creatures, must have been filled not just with footsteps and roars, but with silent dances of feather and form. In this way, feathers echo patterns seen across life. Think of a stag's antlers, a lion's mane, a butterfly's wings. All are costly ornaments, heavy burdens that serve no purpose beyond display. Yet they persist because they work in the invisible realm of attraction and recognition. The feathers that never flew served this same role. They were not shields or swords, but songs. They were living advertisements of health, banners of vitality that helped creatures choose mates, form bonds, and build herds. Evolution, in its quiet creativity, used feathers to turn survival into art. There is also evidence that feathers shaped behaviour. The spread of plumage across arms and tails may have made movements more dramatic, more visible. A leap into the air, even if brief, became a display. A turn of the body, a flash of tail feathers, could startle or attract. These gestures may have been the early seeds of what would later become flight. Before wings could lift bodies into the sky, they could already carry meaning on the ground. Feathers became not only coverings but instruments of expression, shaping the way dinosaurs moved through their world. The discovery of feathered fossils in China's Liaoning province gave us glimpses into this lost reality. Preserved in fine volcanic ash, delicate impressions reveal plumage in exquisite detail. Dinosaurs like Sinosauropteryx, with bands of striped tail feathers, show that colour and pattern were present millions of years before birds rose to dominance. These fossils shattered the old picture of dinosaurs as only scaly beasts. They revealed instead creatures of softness, complexity, and grace. The feathers that never flew added gentleness to a world once imagined only as fierce. Large predators too carried feathers. Uteranus, whose name means feathered tyrant, was a massive hunter cloaked in a shaggy coat. It could not fly, yet its feathers kept it warm in northern climates. Here, feathers were blankets against the cold, insulation for survival. This duality, feathers as warmth and feathers as display, shows how nature reuses its inventions. A single adaptation branches into many roles, each shaping the path of life in new ways. The weirdness of feathers on giants becomes less strange when we see their quiet logic. We should not overlook the role of young dinosaurs. Hatchlings likely emerged covered in down, soft fuzz that helped them survive their first fragile weeks. These coats were not only warmth, but also camouflage. Stripes and mottled patterns could blend them into ferns and leaf litter, hiding them from sharp-eyed predators. In this way, feathers gave even the smallest a better chance at life. The tender fuzz of a hatchling links the great arc of history to the chick that huddles under wings today. What once was ancient still lives, carried forward in softness. The poetry of these feathers lies in their patience. They did not rush to become wings. For millions of years they served their smaller roles, content in warmth and beauty. But slowly, gently, evolution found ways to stretch them, strengthen them, layer them, until one day they lifted creatures into the sky. The feathers that never flew were the prologue to a story of flight, a quiet beginning that would one day fill the skies with geese, swans, and sparrows. Their strangeness was not wasted, it was foundation. Now, when we see a bird preening its feathers or a sparrow fluffing against the cold, we are watching echoes of dinosaurs. Each feather is a link to that ancient world. A reminder that what seems unnecessary today may become essential tomorrow. The feathers that never flew whisper this truth, that life is not hurried, that beauty has value, and that even the strangest of experiments can leave legacies lasting millions of years. In them, we see the gentleness of evolution, creating not only function, but poetry written in quill and plume. As we reach the gentle close of this story, the feathers that never flew invite us to reflect not only on their science, but on their meaning. They remind us that life does not always create for function alone. Sometimes it creates for warmth, sometimes for beauty, and sometimes for reasons we may never fully uncover. Each feather, each filament, each plume was a brushstroke in the canvas of time, shaping a world both strange and soft. In that ancient age, feathers spread across the bodies of dinosaurs in endless variation. Some carried downy coats that wrapped them in silence. Others bore quills that jutted like spears of bone. Some grew long fans that rippled with motion, while others shimmered with colour hidden from our eyes. Each form was a possibility, an experiment, a whisper of what might be, and though many of these dinosaurs would never leave the ground, their feathers were not wasted. They were survival written in softness, presence written in colour, life written in patience. Consider the forests where they lived. Shadows stretched long under tall trees, winds moved through leaves, and light poured in shafts that revealed creatures cloaked in patterns. A predator watching might catch only a glimpse of stripes vanishing into ferns, a flicker of colour disappearing into branches. Feathers were not only ornaments, they were guardians. They blurred edges, softened shapes, and made the life harder to grasp. What seems like a display could also be a shield, a delicate armour against the eyes of danger. But beyond camouflage, beyond attraction, feathers were part of identity itself. Within herds, packs, and families, feathers may have been markers of age, sex, or status. They could have told a story at a glance: who was ready to mate, who was young and learning, who carried strength. They were signs not written in voice, but in texture and form. Just as birds today recognize each other by plumage, the dinosaurs too may have read their world in feathers. The forest became a language, every creature draped in its own sentence. As extinction approached, as fire and shadow descended at the end of the Cretaceous, feathers bore witness to the last days of dinosaurs. They did not save them from what was coming. The great impact, the long winter, the collapse of ecosystems, all of it swept over feather and scale alike. Yet feathers endured, not in the flesh of giants, but in the bloodline that carried forward. Some small dinosaurs, feathered and fragile, survived when the giants fell. From them rose the birds, who would inherit the skies the dinosaurs never truly claimed. In this way, the feathers that never flew were not failures. They were promises. They were the groundwork for wings, the first steps toward a future no creature could imagine. Each plume carried potential, each filament a seed of flight. And when the time came when survival demanded it, those feathers unfolded into the miracle of flight. They lifted sparrows into dawn, eagles into storms, swallows into endless migrations. The sky today is filled with the ghosts of dinosaurs, flying not in scales but in feathers once thought strange. When we look at birds now, we are looking at dinosaurs that made it through. The song of a nightingale, the arc of a falcon, the quiet flapping of a pigeon's wings, all are echoes of ancient forests where feathers first grew. What was once odd has become essential. What was once weird has become ordinary. The feathers that never flew live on every time a chick fluffs in its nest. every time geese rise in formation, every time an owl spreads wings in silence. Their story is not past, it is present, it is alive, it is everywhere. Science continues to uncover details, each fossil a new window. Pigments preserved in stone show that dinosaurs may have been red, orange, blue, even iridescent. Feathers that once seemed dull now shimmer again in the minds of researchers. With every discovery, we come closer to seeing them as they were, not monsters, not oddities, but creatures full of grace. The feathers that puzzled us reveal themselves as keys to understanding, not only of dinosaurs, but of life's creativity. They show us that beauty is never wasted, even when it seems impractical. The gentle truth we learn is that weirdness often hides wisdom. The dinosaurs who carried feathers without flying were not mistakes. They were stepping stones, living bridges across time. Their strangeness was the soil from which flight would grow. And when we watch birds today, we are witnessing the continuation of that experiment. Feathers endure because they are more than tools. They are symbols of resilience, of transformation, of the endless reach of life toward both survival and beauty. As we close this story, imagine once more the ancient forest. A small dinosaur rests on a branch, its body cloaked in soft feathers that gleam in the fading sun. It cannot fly, yet its feathers ruffle in the breeze, alive with colour and warmth. Nearby, others move through the shadows, each carrying their own patterns, their own quiet voices written in plumage. Together they create a world rich with texture, with presence, with possibility. The feathers that never flew fill the air with silence and meaning, a prelude to a sky that would one day be filled with wings. And so the story ends not with stillness, but with continuity. The feathers remain with us, alive in every bird that crosses the horizon. They remind us that life never wastes its experiments, that even the strangest paths can lead to beauty. What once seemed odd is now ordinary, and what was ordinary has become extraordinary. The feathers that never flew carry forward their legacy in every sunrise song, every beating wing, every shadow that passes across the sky. They live on, soft and eternal, reminders of patience, persistence, and the poetry of evolution. In the ancient world, some dinosaurs stretched their bodies toward the heavens in ways that seemed impossible. Among the most extraordinary were the sauropods, the giants with necks so long they seemed to bridge earth and sky. These creatures did not merely walk the land, they carried the horizon with them, their heads drifting high above trees, their bodies like living hills. The question that lingers even now is why such long necks evolved, why nature allowed such extravagant forms. To step into their story is to step into the poetry of height, of reach, of life yearning upward. Imagine a quiet plain, dotted with cycads and ferns, ringed with towering conifers. Across it moves a herd of sauropods, their massive bodies swaying with each step, their necks rising like rivers of bone into the sky. They are not predators, not hunters, but gentle grazers, their mouths searching among branches for leaves. Their size is breathtaking, their presence serene. The earth shakes with their weight, yet their movements are graceful, each step deliberate, each neck a slow arc against the blue. They seem less like animals and more like mountains that have chosen to walk. The necks of sauropods could reach lengths that challenge imagination, over 15 meters in some species. Such length was not only unusual, it was extraordinary. Few creatures before or since have stretched their bodies in such a way. Yet the design was not random. Each neck was built of dozens of vertebrae, lightened with hollow spaces like delicate bridges of bone. Air sacs ran through their bodies, reducing weight and helping them breathe deeply. This was engineering as much as biology, a structure both fragile and strong, delicate yet powerful. Why grow such immense necks? The simplest answer is food. With necks so long, sauropods could reach leaves other creatures could not. They could graze from treetops or sweep low to eat from ferns without moving their heavy bodies. This efficiency gave them an advantage, allowing them to feed without wandering far. A neck became not only a tool but a survival strategy, letting them draw sustenance from both sky and ground. In the endless hunger of giants, every leaf mattered, and long necks opened worlds of possibility. But food was not the only reason. A long neck could also display strength. To carry such a structure, to lift it, to hold it high, was a signal of health. Like the horns of ceratopsians or the feathers of theropods, a sauropod's neck may have been more than function. It may have been form, a message written in silhouette. Herds moving together, necks rising above forests, must have been visions of grandeur. Predators would think twice before challenging such majesty. The very sight of them, towering and unshakable, was a shield in itself. Some scientists wonder if long necks also helped in courtship. A male raising his neck higher, stretching farther, could signal vitality to potential mates. In displays of reach and endurance, the strongest might win. Even among giants, subtle competitions existed, and the neck became part of those silent contests. In this view, the necks were not only tools for feeding, but instruments of beauty, symbols of endurance, signals of belonging. They were bridges between survival and desire, between necessity and wonder. The physiology of these creatures tells us much. Their necks were flexible but not limitless. They could not bend like snakes, yet they could sweep wide arcs across trees and fields. Muscles and tendons anchored the bones, pulling with strength enough to lift tons of weight. Their hearts were massive, pumping blood through long vessels to reach brains high above the ground. Some theories suggest specialized systems helped them balance pressure, ensuring that the distance between heart and head did not overwhelm them. To be a sauropod was to carry a challenge in every breath, solved elegantly by evolution. Imagine standing beneath one as it passed. Its legs alone rose higher than a person, its body a wall of living motion. Above, the neck arched like a bridge into leaves, and its head, small in proportion, plucked quietly at branches. You would feel dwarfed, not only in size but in time, for these creatures lived in an age where the earth itself seemed larger, slower, deeper. Their presence was not fierce but calming, their scales so vast it erased urgency. They moved as if they had all the time in the world, as if height itself were a form of peace. In the poetry of their lives, the necks of sauropods symbolized aspiration. They reach toward the sky not to escape but to belong. They remind us that evolution does not always aim for simplicity. Sometimes it chooses extremes, creating shapes that astonish rather than conform. The necks that touch the sky are monuments to that truth. They were not mistakes, not accidents. They were possibilities made real, forms tested by time and found worthy. They invite us to wonder what it means to reach, to extend, to live in connection with the heights above. As dusk fell on those ancient plains, the sauropods would gather in herds, their necks rising like silhouettes of trees against fading light. The wind moved through leaves, the earth cooled, and stars began to appear above. The dinosaurs lifted their heads as if to greet them, as if to bridge the space between land and sky. In their height, in their reach, they carried a kind of quiet majesty, a reminder that life can choose to grow, not only wide, not only strong, but tall. The necks that touched the sky were not only about survival, they were about wonder itself. To follow the arc of those towering necks more deeply, we must look at the ways they changed not only the bodies of sauropods, but the landscapes they lived in. A long neck was not an isolated feature. It reshaped the ecology around it. By reaching high into the canopy, sauropods trimmed trees in ways no other creature could, opening sunlight to the forest floor and allowing ferns and shrubs to flourish. They were gardeners on a colossal scale, sculpting their world with every mouthful of leaves. The necks that touched the sky did not only serve their bearers, they reshaped entire ecosystems. Consider the variety of sauropods. Some, like Brachiosaurus, held their necks upright, their heads rising like watchtowers over forests. Others, like Diplodocus, extended their necks out long and low, sweeping across ground vegetation like giant living scythes. Each design reflected a different strategy, a different way of life. Their diversity shows us that long necks were not a single solution, but many. Nature experimented again and again, bending bone and tendon into different shapes, testing how best to balance the weight of a giant with the need to feed it. In this way, the necks became not only tools, but chapters in an ongoing experiment. The engineering of these necks remains one of the great marvels of evolution. Their bones were riddled with air sacs, lightening them while keeping them strong. This design mirrors the hollow bones of birds, a reminder that even in giants, weight must be managed with delicacy. The air sacs also connected to lungs, helping move air efficiently through their enormous bodies. Each breath filled not only lungs, but reservoirs of air within bones, cooling muscles and fueling endurance. Without these adaptations, the necks could not have grown so long. They were marvels of balance, great arches of bone supported by the lightness of air itself. Movement was another wonder. A sauropod's neck could sweep in wide arcs, grazing vast areas without the body shifting. This efficiency mattered for such heavy creatures. To move the whole body required enormous energy, but to move the neck required far less. By simply turning their heads, they could harvest food in circles, stripping leaves from trees or ferns without shifting their bulk. This design saved energy and gave them an advantage over smaller creatures. The necks were not burdens, they were solutions to the constant hunger of giants. But beyond utility, we must imagine the social meaning of these necks. In herds, necks rising together may have been signals of unity. When threatened, dozens of long necks lifting at once would create the illusion of a living forest, a wall of size and motion. For predators, this sight alone may have been enough to turn retreat into survival. And within the herd, subtle movements of neck and head could have been a form of communication, gestures that signaled danger, readiness, or calm. These necks, silent but expressive, may have been as much about language as about leaves. Some scientists suggest that necks could have played a role in courtship as well. Males may have engaged in slow displays, lifting their necks high, weaving them in arcs, or pressing them against rivals in contests of endurance. The strongest, those who could sustain such displays, proved their fitness. Just as antelopes clash, horns, or birds spread wings, sauropods may have lifted their necks in rituals of attraction. If so, then these immense structures were not merely tools of feeding, but instruments of beauty. silent dances written in bone and tendon. We cannot ignore the challenge these necks pose to biology. To raise a head so high, blood had to travel great distances from the heart. Some estimates suggest their hearts weighed hundreds of kilograms, pumping with immense force. Specialized valves and vessels may have evolved to manage pressure, preventing damage as blood surged upward. Even standing still was an act of triumph, a balance of forces that allowed life to persist against gravity itself. In every beat of a sauropod's heart, in every lift of its head, there was quiet defiance of the impossible. Picture again a herd moving across a floodplain. Their necks sweep back and forth gathering food, while their bodies roll forward with slow momentum. The land shifts under their weight, grasses bend, trees thin, rivers change course. Their presence is not only seen but felt, aping the earth beneath them. The long necks are not curiosities but pillars of an ancient rhythm, part of a cycle where giants feed and the land renews itself. They were both consumers and creators, shaping their own world with every reach. At night, when stars filled the sky, those necks would still rise like silhouettes against the horizon. Perhaps they rested low on the ground, or perhaps some lifted toward the stars, their outlines blending with constellations. To see them then would be to see earth and sky meet in living form, to see creatures who carried both ground and heaven in their shape. They were reminders that life is not limited to smallness, that it can stretch toward vastness, that it can write its story not only in the soil but in the sky above. The poetry of these necks lies in their aspiration. They remind us that survival is not always about what is near at hand. Sometimes it is about what lies farther, what lies higher, what requires reach. The sauropods did not settle for what was easy. They grew into what was extraordinary, carrying their lives upward into spaces no other creature had claimed. In them we see the quiet courage of evolution, willing to test the improbable, willing to reach toward the impossible, and finding in that reach a new way of life. And so the necks that touched the sky were not only physical structures, they were metaphors written in flesh and bone. They tell us that life is capable of reaching farther than seems reasonable, stretching beyond need into wonder. They remind us that strangeness is often strength, that height itself can be a form of poetry. In their presence, the world was larger, grander, more mysterious, and even now, in stone and memory, their long necks rise again, guiding our gaze upward, teaching us to wonder at what lies beyond our reach. As we move toward the gentle end of this story, the necks of the sauropods become more than structures of survival. They become symbols of what life can create when given time, space, and imagination. Their length, their grace, their grandeur, all whisper truths about evolution's patience, about the way nature builds wonders step by step, vertebra by vertebra, until the impossible becomes real. To walk among them in thought is to walk in the presence of monuments carved not from stone but from living bone. The legacy of these necks is written not only in their fossils but in the landscapes they once shaped. Forests grew differently because of their reach. The tallest trees bent their branches higher, the ground plants flourished in patches where light filtered through the spaces they created. The very structure of ecosystems was tuned to their presence. They were not just animals within their world, they were architects of it. Each sweep of a neck was a pruning, each meal a reshaping, each herd a force that sculpted the rhythm of land and sky. In the fossils we find today, the vertebrae of sauropods lie like beads strung across stone. each massive yet delicate, hollowed by air, lightened by design. To hold one in a museum is to hold both strength and fragility at once, to feel the paradox that made their lives possible. Paleontologists trace their curves, reconstruct their postures, and still debate how they carried themselves. Did they hold their necks high like giraffes, reaching into the canopy? Or did they sweep them low like cranes, grazing vast stretches without moving? The truth may have been both, a flexibility that let them master their world in many ways. These questions remind us that knowledge, like necks, stretches across distance. We may never have final answers, but the search itself is part of the wonder. Each fossil is a fragment of a larger picture, a vertebra in the spine of history. When joined together, they form not just skeletons, but stories that lift our own understanding toward the sky. The necks of sauropods are bridges not only between ground and leaves, but between past and present, between mystery and meaning, between life and imagination. Think for a moment of their hearts. To send blood up such long distances required power beyond measure. To raise their heads, to breathe deeply, to live at such a scale was to defy the ordinary. In every heartbeat, they carried the challenge of gravity, yet they endured. They thrived for millions of years, filling continents with their presence. Their long necks were not fragile experiments that failed. They were triumphs of adaptation, proving that even the strangest solutions can persist when shaped by the slow hand of time. In the poetry of their lives, we can see reflections of our own longing to reach. Just as we build towers and bridges, just as we lift our eyes to stars, the sauropods lifted their bodies toward heights that seemed unreachable. Their necks remind us that to reach is to hope, to stretch beyond the immediate, to claim a space higher than what is needed. Evolution did not stop at feeding, it reached for grandeur. In these creatures, survival and wonder intertwined, leaving us a legacy of upward motion written in stone. At twilight, imagine a herd gathered by a river, the light fading, their silhouettes vast against the horizon. Their necks rise like a grove of living trees, swaying gently as they feed, drink and rest. The air hums with insects, the ground trembles with each step, and above them the first stars emerge. For a moment they seem to touch those stars, their shapes blending with constellations, their reach a bridge between earth and sky. In this vision, the necks are not just anatomy. They are poetry in motion, reminders of life's boundless creativity. When extinction came, when the age of giants ended, the necks could not save them. Fire, shadow, and change swept across the earth, and their long forms fell into silence. Yet their story did not vanish. It lingers in fossils, in bones unearthed from stone, in the imagination of those who stand before their skeletons today. Their height remains with us as an idea, a metaphor for striving, for reaching, for growing beyond the ordinary. They remind us that even when life ends, its shapes can inspire those who come after. And so the necks that touch the sky endure not in flesh, but in meaning. They are lessons in scale, in patience, in wonder. They show us that survival can be spectacular, that utility can become beauty, that evolution sometimes writes not only for necessity but for astonishment. They tell us that life, when left to its own imagination, creates monuments as breathtaking as any we build. The long-necked dinosaurs were not mistakes. They were masterpieces, carved in time, living bridges between earth and sky. Now, as you close your eyes and think of them, Let your mind drift upward. See the horizon of their backs, the slow sway of their necks, the quiet grace of their steps. Let them guide your thoughts higher, toward stars, toward dreams, toward possibilities that stretch beyond the known. The necks that touch the sky still whisper, even in silence, that reaching is part of being alive. And in their story we find not only the past but our own reflection, the longing to rise, the courage to stretch, the beauty of touching what lies just beyond our reach. Among the many strange shapes that dinosaurs carried, few are as puzzling as the claws of the therizinosaurs. These creatures, unlike any others, walked on two legs and bore claws so long they seemed like scythes meant to cut the very air. Some stretched over a metre in length, curved blades of bone and keratin attached to hands that seemed almost too delicate to hold them. They were not predators, not fierce hunters of flesh, yet they carried weapons larger than any tigers or eagles. The question echoes softly through time. Why would nature craft claws so long, so heavy, so strange? Imagine a therizinosaur moving slowly through a forest. Its body is broad, covered not in scales alone but in feathers that drape it like a shaggy coat. Its head is small, its jaws shaped for plants, not meat. And yet from its arms hang claws so immense they drag attention instantly. Each step seems deliberate, each movement cautious, as if even the animal itself must manage the weight of its weapons. To us, they look monstrous, out of place, yet they were part of its grace, part of its survival, part of its quiet story. The first thought when seeing such claws is defense. A predator lunging would find itself met with long, slashing arcs that could wound or kill. Even if rarely used, their presence alone may have been enough to deter danger. A pack of raptors or a lurking tyrannosaur would think twice before attacking a creature armed with blades longer than swords. The claws created a halo of safety, a boundary no predator would cross lightly. In this way, their strangeness may have been their strength, not through constant combat but through constant warning. But the claws held other possibilities. Some scientists suggest they were tools, not weapons. With such length, they could pull down branches heavy with leaves, stripping food from trees beyond normal reach. They could rake through shrubs, exposing tender shoots, or draw vines closer to their mouths. In this way, the claws became harvesters, extensions of the jaw, helping them feed in ways no other herbivore could. What seemed absurd was practical, a way of turning awkwardness into advantage. The forest itself became their pantry, opened by the reach of their curved blades. Beyond feeding and defense, the claws may also have been part of display. Imagine a courtship where one animal raises its long arms, spreading feathers and revealing claws gleaming in sunlight. The sheer size of these structures could have signalled health and strength, proof that the individual was strong enough to grow and carry them. Just as antlers or manes serve as ornaments in living animals, claws could have been banners of vitality. To see them was to see survival embodied, not in teeth or speed, but in the sheer extravagance of form. The therizinosaurs themselves were gentle giants of a peculiar kind. They stood tall, with pot-bellied bodies and long necks, feeding on plants yet carrying the appearance of predators. To early scientists, their fossils were confusing. The claws suggested ferocity, but the teeth whispered otherwise. Only with time did the picture grow clearer. These were herbivores cloaked in the armour of carnivores, peaceful feeders with the hands of nightmares. Their weirdness was not contradiction but balance, a blending of roles that revealed evolution's creativity. Picture them in herds, their long claws weaving through vegetation, their feathers catching light, their slow movement shaping the forest. To each other, perhaps the claws were as ordinary as a giraffe's neck or a peacock's tail. They were part of identity, part of daily life. To us, they seem excessive, but to them, they were tools, shields, ornaments, perhaps even instruments of sound as they scraped against bark or struck against one another. The claws carried voices we cannot hear, languages we can only imagine. The fossil record shows how carefully these claws were built. Their curves were smooth, their inner structures dense and strong, their tips sharp but not fragile. They were not random accidents but precise designs honed by countless generations. Whether for pulling, tearing, defending, or displaying, they were perfectly suited to the life of their bearers. Each claw was a blend of strength and elegance, a paradox that defined the therizinosaurs themselves. They were creatures of contradiction, gentle yet armed, strange yet successful. As night falls in our vision of their world, the therizinosaurs rest in groups, their claws folded gently against their bodies. Moonlight glints on the curves, turning them into crescents of silver against feathers dark as shadows. They are silent, calm, their strangeness hidden in the stillness of sleep. Yet even then, their claws hold meaning. They are promises of safety, of nourishment, of belonging. They are not accidents. They are part of a deeper truth, that life often chooses shapes that seem odd, yet those shapes carry wisdom beyond our sight. And so, the claws that were too long remind us of evolution's boldness. They tell us that survival can wear many faces, that even awkwardness can be grace. They remind us that what looks strange in one view may be beautiful in another. The therizinosaurs lived not as monsters, but as wonders, their claws not burdens but gifts. In them we see that life's experiments, no matter how odd, are still threads in the great tapestry of existence. The claws stretched beyond reason, and in that stretch they found meaning. To move deeper into the mystery of those enormous claws, we must look at how they shaped not only the therizinosaurs themselves, but also the worlds they lived in. These claws were not small features that could be ignored. They defined the animal's entire way of being. Every step, every gesture, every meal was influenced by the presence of curved blades longer than a person's arm. They were part of survival, part of identity, part of a quiet story where strangeness itself became strength. The claws were slow-growing structures, forming year by year as the animal matured. In young therizinosaurs, the claws were smaller, less curved, less impressive, but with age they elongated, sweeping into full crescents. This suggests that they were not only tools of feeding, but signals of maturity. Just as deer grow antlers or birds develop bright plumage as they age, the therizinosaurs may have revealed their life stage through the growth of their claws. To see long claws was to see adulthood, readiness, and strength. They were timelines written in keratin, arcs that told the story of life itself. One theory suggests that the claws acted as giant rakes. With sweeping motions, the dinosaurs could have pulled down branches heavy with leaves, stripping them within reach. Their broad, pot-bellied bodies suggest a digestive system suited to large quantities of plant matter, and the claws may have been vital tools in gathering enough food to fuel such size. In this way, their strangeness was purely practical. What looked monstrous was simply efficient, a solution shaped for a life of endless grazing. Their claws were forks and sickles, not swords. Yet the claws may have been more than feeding tools. They could have reshaped forests, pulling down vines, opening spaces, spreading seeds. Every gesture had consequences beyond the individual. Just as elephants today tear branches and create clearings, the Resinosaurs may have acted as gardeners of their world, their long claws cultivating new growth where old stood before. Their awkward beauty was part of an ecological rhythm, where the sweep of a claw influenced the song of the forest. They were not only creatures in the ecosystem, but forces shaping it. Predators too would have seen those claws as warnings. Even if rarely used in combat, the sight of them was enough to inspire caution. Imagine a predator circling, measuring the risk. The Therizinosaur stands, feathers bristling, claws rising like silver moons in sunlight. A single swipe could wound, a single strike could change the balance. In that hesitation lay survival. The claws created a shield of fear, a psychological barrier that protected the gentle feeders who bore them. They were defences of presence, weapons of suggestion, guardians made not of action but of potential. Scientists also see possibility in their use during social encounters. The claws may have been displayed in slow dances of courtship, raised and lowered in gestures that spoke without sound. Males may have shown them off to rivals or mates, curving them in arcs of pride. Feathers spread, claws lifted, bodies swayed. Such movements could have been silent performances that determined who was strongest, who was worthy, who would pass life forward. The claws were not just tools of survival, but instruments of beauty, woven into the fabric of social life. To hold one of these claws as a fossil is to hold paradox, heavy yet delicate in its curve, fierce in appearance yet peaceful in purpose. They remind us that nature does not always draw straight lines between form and function. Sometimes it blurs, sometimes it bends, sometimes it creates for reasons hidden beneath the surface. The claws that look too long to be practical may have carried meanings that escape us still, meanings written in behaviours lost to time, in gestures we will never see, in lives that passed before memory could record them. The bodies that carried these claws were also strange. The Resinosaurs walked on two legs but moved slowly, their bellies heavy, their arms long. Covered in feathers, they looked more like giant shaggy birds than like lizards. Their claws completed this odd picture, turning them into creatures unlike any other. To imagine them alive is to see contradictions blended into harmony. They were predators in shape but not in spirit, their weapons transformed into tools of peace. They remind us that appearances deceive, that strangeness does not equal savagery, that the story of life is always more complex than it first appears. In the quiet of night, when the forest grew still, the claws folded close to their bodies. They rested like crescent moons against feathers, silver shadows under starlight. Their presence was silent, their purpose unspoken, but still they mattered. Even in sleep, they were symbols of safety, of identity, of the experiments of evolution. Each claw was a signature written by time, a reminder that survival is not only about speed or teeth or strength. Sometimes it is about carrying what seems unnecessary and finding in it a hidden kind of grace. The strangeness of those claws teaches us a lesson about patience. Evolution does not always create what is immediately useful. Sometimes it explores, sometimes it exaggerates, sometimes it creates shapes that seem odd until their purpose is revealed. The claws of the Resinosaurs may always remain partly mysterious, their full story hidden in the silence of extinction. Yet even in mystery they speak. They tell us that weirdness is not weakness, that extravagance can carry wisdom, that the oddest experiments of life can still thrive for millions of years. And so, the claws that were too long stand as monuments to nature's imagination. They remind us that survival wears many faces, that beauty and utility can merge in unexpected ways, that strangeness itself is a form of strength. In them, we see not monsters but marvels, not accidents but art. Their claws stretched farther than reason, yet in that stretch they found belonging. And as their story reaches us now, it tells us that life's oddities are often its greatest wonders, waiting patiently for us to look again and see their truth. As the story of these immense claws draws toward its close, we are left with the gentle realization that their strangeness was never a flaw. They were the result of millions of years of quiet experimentation, the outcome of choices written slowly in bone and keratin. What seems excessive to us today was ordinary to them, a natural part of life carried without hesitation. In the silence of prehistory, the therizinosaurs moved with dignity, their claws curving like living scythes, and the earth accepted them as easily as it accepts trees with wide branches or flowers with bright petals. They belonged. The fossils remind us of this belonging. Each preserved claw is a curved record of time, a fragment of a story that once played across forests and plains. Some are cracked, some broken, some incomplete, yet all carry the same message. These creatures lived, thrived, and passed their legacy forward. Their claws were not accidents but identities, markers of a life well suited to its world. In the stone impressions, we can almost imagine them raised again, glinting in the light, moving slowly through vegetation, pulling branches closer, shaping the forest with every sweep. In this way, their claws were bridges between survival and creativity. They served many roles at once: tools of feeding, shields of defense, ornaments of attraction, instruments of identity. They were multifunctional, layered in meaning, rich in possibility. To reduce them to a single explanation would be to miss their poetry. Nature often creates in abundance, weaving multiple stories into a single form. The claws that look too long to us may have been exactly long enough for the lives they were meant to live. They carried hidden wisdom, written in uses we may never fully uncover. When we think of them now, we often picture danger, for claws in our imagination mean attack. But the therizinosaurs remind us that appearances deceive. Their claws were not daggers of violence, but arcs of adaptation, peaceful tools for creatures who lived by leaves and stems. This paradox is one of their greatest lessons, that power need not be cruel, that strength can be carried quietly, that weapons can become ornaments. The claws were not meant to strike endlessly, but to exist, to be seen, to speak of endurance in their own silent way. Perhaps the most poetic truth of these claws lies in their stillness. Raised in sunlight, folded in rest, curved against feathers, they were always present, always shaping the silhouette of their owners. They were constants in the rhythm of life, companions to every step, every meal, every season. Over years they grew and thickened, marking the passage of time. In their arcs we can see the history of each animal's life, a diary written not in words but in shape. They were lives curved into crescents, reminders of growth, of survival, of patience. And yet, even with all our science, mystery lingers. We may never know every use, every gesture, every meaning. Did they drum against trees in warning? Did they clash softly at ritual displays? Did they scrape bark for insects or strip vines in silence? Each possibility is a doorway, and behind each doorway lies a world we cannot fully enter. But the beauty of science is that wonder remains even in unknowing. The claws that seem too long invite us to dream, to imagine, to see in their shapes not only answers, but questions worth holding. As the sun set in their world, herds of therizinosaurs must have cast shadows unlike any others. Their long arms, their sweeping claws, their feathered bodies created silhouettes both strange and majestic. Against golden skies they looked like guardians of forests, caretakers of an ancient rhythm. Predators kept their distance, plants yielded to their touch, and the land itself shifted with their presence. They were not errors in design but essential notes in the symphony of their age, harmonies of oddness that made the music of life richer and more profound. When extinction finally came, when the age of dinosaurs gave way to silence and change, their claws could not save them. Yet their story endured. Buried in stone, preserved in fragments, they waited for discovery. And when unearthed, they astonished. They still do today. The claws that once raked thieves now rake through the imagination, pulling our thoughts into questions about beauty, survival, and creativity. They live again in our wonder, their curves reflected in our curiosity, their strangeness reborn as inspiration. In closing, the claws that were too long remind us that life's experiments are never wasted. Even the most unusual forms can carry meaning, even the most puzzling adaptations can succeed for millions of years. Their story is not one of failure but of flourishing, not of absurdity but of elegance. They lived fully, carrying their strangeness with pride, proving that weirdness itself is a form of wisdom. And in remembering them, we are reminded of ourselves, that our own oddities, our own eccentricities may one day be the very traits that carry us forward. So let the image of these creatures linger. See their claws raised like silver moons, curving against twilight skies, sweeping through forests with gentle power. Hear the silence of their presence, the calm of their movements, the poetry of their forms. The claws that were too long were never mistakes. They were gifts of time, emblems of patience, reminders that survival can be both strange and beautiful. They point not only backward into history but forward into imagination, guiding us to honour the weird, the wondrous, and the quietly magnificent shapes of life. Among the many mysteries of dinosaurs, few are as haunting as their faces. Skulls carved into strange shapes, jaws filled with teeth of every size, noses stretched into crests, and eyes framed by bony ridges. They look to us like masks from forgotten dreams. Some faces seemed monstrous, others almost comical, yet all were real, worn by living creatures that walked the earth for millions of years. These were the faces that time forgot, the visages left behind in stone, silent and strange, carrying secrets about who they were and how they lived. Imagine standing before a fossil skull, its eye sockets hollow, its jaw frozen open as if mid-breath. At first glance it looks terrifying, but then you notice its details. The curve of the beak, the ridges above the eyes, the delicate lines etched into bone. These were not random features, they were signatures of life, each shape formed with purpose. Some carried noses that rose into towering crests, hollow tubes that may have sung with sound. Others bore teeth shaped for grinding plants or tearing flesh. Each face was a map of survival, of identity, of adaptation written across the span of time. Take the hadrosaurs, for instance, dinosaurs often called duck-billed. Their faces were long and flat, ending in wide beaks. To us they seem almost humorous, yet they were masterpieces of design. With hundreds of teeth packed into their jaws, they could grind plants with efficiency unmatched in their age. Some had crests rising from their skulls, hollow passages that turned their calls into low, echoing songs. These faces were not mistakes, they were instruments, blending form and function into one. A herd of hadrosaurs moving together must have filled the air not just with footsteps, but with music carried through their faces. Then there were the carnivores, their skulls stretched into shapes of fear. Tyrannosaurs bore jaws lined with teeth as long as knives, their faces wide, their eyes set for depth and focus. Yet even here there was strangeness. Some carried ridges above their eyes, ornaments with no clear or certain purpose. Others bore asymmetries, details we cannot explain. Their faces were not only weapons but canvases of variation. Each predator's skull was unique, a blend of ferocity and individuality. To meet their gaze in life would have been to look into the deep experiment of evolution itself. Not all faces were fierce. Ceratopsians, with their frills and horns, wore faces like shields of bone. Their skulls were wide, their noses adorned with spikes, their eyes framed by ornate ridges. To us, they look theatrical, as if dressed for a play. But for them, these faces were language, speaking of strength, of health, of belonging. The frills may have flashed with colour, the horns may have carried signals, the ridges may have shaped recognition within herds. Each face was a voice, silent to us now, but alive in its time. They were more than expressions. They were survival written in bone. Perhaps the strangest of all were the ankylosaurs, armoured dinosaurs with skulls that looked like helmets. Their faces were low and wide, their jaws heavy for grinding tough plants, their heads capped with knobs of bone. To us, they look almost alien, as if shaped not by nature, but by the imagination of sculptors. Yet they were perfectly suited to their lives, blending into bodies clad in armour, tails tipped with clubs. Their faces were not meant for beauty but for resilience, masks of endurance that helped them persist in a dangerous world. In their oddity lay strength, in their strangeness lay safety. When we gaze upon these skulls today, we are struck not only by their forms, but by their silence. We cannot see the skin, the colours, the expressions that once brought them to life. Did their faces flush with blood in display? Did patterns mark their skin? Did their eyes gleam with colours we cannot imagine? Fossils give us bone, but the rest is left to wonder. These are the faces that time forgot, not because they were erased, but because they are incomplete, half-told stories waiting for our imagination to fill the gaps. And yet, even incomplete, they hold power. To stand before them is to feel time collapse, to see not just an object of stone, but a creature that once breathed, fed, fought, and lived. Their faces are windows into vanished worlds, reminders that life does not shape itself into simple patterns. It bends, twists, experiments, and in doing so creates beauty, even in the strangest of forms. These faces are echoes of that beauty, frozen but enduring, carried forward into our own age as emblems of life's creativity. Imagine for a moment the living world they inhabited. Forests filled with calls resonating from hollow crests, plains dotted with frilled skulls glowing with colour, rivers lined with duckbills dipping their faces into water. Every ecosystem was alive with diversity, and faces were part of that living conversation. To know one was to know a species, to recognise patterns and shapes as surely as we recognise features in one another today. Faces were identity, connection, and survival, all bound together in bone and skin, And so the faces that time forgot were never truly lost. They live on in fossils, in reconstructions, in the imagination of those who study them. They live on in birds, whose beaks and crests are echoes of ancient forms. They live on in us, for our fascination with them is proof that their story still matters. Their strangeness has not faded, it has deepened, becoming a bridge between their age and ours. We look into their hollow eyes and see not emptiness but memory, not absence but presence, not silence but a whisper that life has always been varied, creative, and wondrous. To journey further into the story of these forgotten faces is to uncover the ways they shape the lives of the creatures who wore them. A face is never just bone and skin. It is a tool, a signal, a window into the needs and desires of life. In Dinosaurs, faces were not silent masks but active instruments, guiding how they fed, how they fought, how they found each other. Each unusual ridge or curve, each hollow crest or jutting one, was part of a living conversation written across millions of years. Consider the hadrosaurs again, with their strange crests rising high above their skulls. These hollow structures were not accidents. Inside them ran long chambers that connected to nasal passages, turning breath into resonance. When they called, the sound would have echoed low and deep, carrying across plains like the rumble of distant thunder. Each species had its own crest shape, its own resonance, its own voice. These were not only faces but instruments, turning heads into horns that sang through the air. The strangeness of their faces became music, a language that shaped herd life in ways we are only beginning to imagine. In ceratopsians, the faces told other stories. Their frills, wide and ornate, were covered in blood vessels, hinting at colour and change. Perhaps their faces flushed with red in challenge, glowed with patterns during courtship, shifted with seasons to signal readiness. A face was not a static mask, but a living canvas able to change its message. The horns and ridges that crown these animals were not only defences but banners of identity. Each face was a declaration of species, of health, of belonging. To see one was to know immediately who it was, what it carried, and where it fit within its world. Predators bore faces no less strange. The tyrannosaurs carried jaws massive enough to crush bone, but above their eyes were ridges whose purpose remains uncertain. Some suggest they shielded the eyes, others that they carried colour or display. Perhaps they were signs of age, growing more prominent with maturity, much like the horns of modern animals. Even here in the fiercest of hunters, faces were not only weapons but identities, carrying subtleties beyond their terrifying teeth. The details of their skulls speak of variation and individuality, reminders that even predators carried strangeness beyond necessity. There were also the pachycephalosaurs, dinosaurs with domed skulls that looked like helmets of bone. Their faces were topped with thick, rounded crests, as if they were built for headbutting. Some scientists believe they clashed against one another, their faces becoming tools of combat, echoes of contests seen in rams and deer today. Others think the domes may have been bright with colour, signals of attraction rather than weapons. Whatever their role, these strange faces were central to their survival. The domes made them unique, part of the identity that allowed them to thrive in their time. The ankylosaurs, armoured and low, bore faces like shields. Their wide jaws ground plants, their skulls reinforced by knobs and ridges, blending perfectly with the armour across their backs. Their faces were less about beauty and more about resilience designed to survive in a dangerous world. Yet even here, individuality appeared. Each species carried its own arrangement of bumps and ridges, subtle differences that mark them apart. To us they look alien, but to them, these faces were normal, part of a body perfectly suited to its role as a living fortress. The more we study these faces, the more we realize how much they influenced behavior. A hadrosaur's crest determined how it sounded, shaping its communication. A ceratopsian's frill shaped its displays, influencing mating and herd structure. A predator's ridges and scars spoke of age and battle survived. Faces were not passive features, they were central to survival, to community, to identity. They were signals that guided recognition, competition, and attraction. They remind us that even in the ancient world, life was filled with conversation spoken not in words but in shapes. And yet much remains hidden. We do not know the colours that once covered these faces. Did ceratopsians wear bright patterns like tropical birds or muted tones like deer? Did predators carry dark masks to strike fear, or light markings to signal to each other? The fossils are stunt on these questions, but our imaginations fill the gaps. The faces that time forgot invite us to dream, to see them not only as skulls but as living expressions. They are puzzles whose missing pieces make them more, not less, beautiful. When we close our eyes and picture their world, we can see herds of hadrosaurs moving across plains, their faces alive with sound, each crest a different voice in a vast chorus. We can see ceratopsians gathered at rivers, their frills glowing with blood and colour as they face each other in silent contests. We can see predators watching, their ridged faces scanning the horizon, their jaws ready but their features carrying subtleties beyond hunger. We can see ankylosaurs with helmeted heads grazing in peace, their faces low but enduring. Together, they create a gallery of strangeness, a living museum of faces that were never forgotten in their time. The poetry of these faces lies in their diversity. No two species looked the same, no two skulls carried the same arrangement of ridges, horns, or crests. Each was a unique experiment, a form tested and refined by time. This variety was not wasteful, it was the essence of survival. In their differences lay resilience, in their strangeness lay strength. The faces that time forgot were in truth the faces that time celebrated, each one a reminder that life thrives in diversity, that there is beauty in being different. And so when we look at them now, hollow-eyed in museums or etched into stone, we see more than fossils. We see stories, languages, experiments, and songs. We see faces that once shaped entire worlds. Their strangeness is no longer oddness. It is poetry carried across millions of years to remind us that life is at once practical and creative, efficient and extravagant. These are not the faces that time forgot. They are the faces that time preserved, waiting for us to notice their wonder. As we close the story of these forgotten faces, we begin to see them not simply as fossils, but as mirrors of life's imagination. They remind us that evolution is not bound to symmetry or simplicity. It is a painter with endless colours, a sculptor unafraid of excess, a storyteller who writes in bone and skin. The faces of dinosaurs were not just tools for feeding or fighting, they were living expressions, identities carried proudly across the ages. Their strangeness was not a flaw. It was a signature, a declaration that life thrives best when it dares to be different. Picture a dawn in the Cretaceous, the first light spilling across forests and plains. A herd of hadrosaurs lifts their heads, their crests glowing faintly as they call out, each sound deep and resonant, shaping the morning with voices born from hollow skulls. In another clearing, ceratopsians face one another, their frills flushed with blood, their horns glinting as they circle in ritual display. Far off, ankylosaurs graze, their armoured faces low and steady, while predators watch from the shadows, their ridged skulls catching the faint glow of sunrise. In this ancient chorus of faces, every shape tells a story, every ridge and crest carries meaning. These faces also remind us of resilience. For millions of years they carried their bearers through cycles of change, through droughts and floods, heat and cold, peace and danger. A face built with strength was a shield against predators. A face built with beauty was a beacon to mates. A face built with strangeness was a way to survive in a crowded, competitive world. Each one endured because it worked, because it gave its owner a chance to live, to grow, to pass its legacy forward. The faces we find in stone are not failures but triumphs, proof of strategies that succeeded for countless generations, and yet extinction came. No crest, no horn, no frill, no beak could hold back the shadow that fell at the end of the Cretaceous. The world changed too suddenly, too violently, and the faces that had once filled plains and forests vanished into silence. But though the creatures themselves are gone, their faces endure in stone, waiting for us to rediscover them. Each fossil is a memory, each skull a fragment of a story that time refused to erase completely. The faces may have been forgotten by their world, but they were kept safe for ours. When we look at these skulls today, in quiet halls of museums or in the hands of paleontologists in the field, we see not only bones but echoes of life. The empty eye sockets are not empty at all. They are windows into vision long gone, reminders that eyes once gleamed there, alert and alive. The jaws that gape are not silent. They once chewed, called, roared, sang. The frills, the crests, the ridges are not just strange. They are messages written across time, waiting for us to read them. The faces that time forgot speak still, not with sound, but with wonder. The poetry of these faces lies in their unfinished stories. We will never know their exact colours, their full expressions, the subtle ways they moved in life. And yet, in that absence, they invite us into imagination. They ask us to fill the silence with thought, to honour what we do not know as much as what we do. In this way, the forgotten faces become bridges between knowledge and mystery, between fact and dream. They teach us that science is not only about answers, but about questions that keep us searching, questions that keep wonder alive. Think of how these faces continue in today's world. Birds, the living descendants of dinosaurs, still wear beaks, crests and ridges. The flamingo's curve, the toucan's colours, the eagle's sharp beak, all are echoes of forms first tested long ago. Even in our fascination with animals, we look at faces first. We search for meaning in eyes, for identity in features, for beauty in strangeness. The faces of dinosaurs live on in this instinct, reminding us that to see a face is to connect, to feel, to understand life beyond ourselves. At twilight in that ancient world, when shadows grew long and stars began to shine, the faces of dinosaurs must have been hauntingly beautiful. Crests silhouetted against fading skies, horns outlined in gold light, jaws soft in the hush of evening. They were living sculptures, artworks carried on bodies, expressions of a time when the earth itself seemed larger and more daring. To walk among them would have been to walk in a gallery of living masks, each one unique, each one essential, each one unforgettable. And so the faces that time forgot are not truly forgotten. They live in stone, in birds, in imagination, in the awe they inspire when we see them. They remind us that life's creativity has no limit, that what seems strange is often what endures, that beauty and survival often share the same face. They tell us that to exist is to wear identity, to carry strangeness with pride, to let the world see who we are. Their story is not silence but throng, not absence but presence, not forgetting but remembering through wonder. Close your eyes and let these faces linger. See the duckbills raising their crests to call across the plains. See the ceratopsians glowing with frills in sunlight. See the ankylosaurs with their armoured brows grazing in peace. See the predators with ridged skulls scanning the horizon. See them all together, a gallery of lives carved into memory. The faces that time forgot look back at us now, reminding us gently that life is not meant to be ordinary. It is meant to be strange, beautiful, diverse, and alive in ways that astonish. And in that lesson, they live forever,